Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. My name is Matt Hoepfinger. I've been with Bee Informed Partnership for a little over a year now, and I work as a field specialist. And there are, 6 of us that do this job, and we see a lot of colonies. So this presentation that we put together was originally for commercial beekeepers. However, we realized that almost everything in here is applicable to all beekeepers, backyard beekeepers as well. So yeah, before we get started, is there anything else, Dan? You want to introduce yourself real quick too?
Sure. Yeah, so my name is Dan Aurell, and like Nat said, my home base is in Texas at Texas A&M University, and I've been working for BIP as a field specialist for 3 years now. But before that, I have a biology background and had a few seasons in commercial beekeeping in Canada, my homeland, and New Zealand. I keep a few hobby colonies. Myself right now, just on the side of this bee work. How about you, Matt? Are you keeping bees?
Yeah, I do. We see thousands of colonies in commercial operations, but I am myself a hobbyist as well. So I have a couple yards where I keep my own bees. Yeah. Okay, so let's get started. So here you can see this is a map of the U.S. and this is just showing you sort of the locations that the field specialists work. As you can see, the yellow dots represent the home bases for all of us field specialists. You can see in California at UC Davis, myself and Rob Snyder work out of California. Ben Solomon works in Oregon, out of Oregon State. In the Midwest, you've got Nelson Williams working out of the University of Minnesota. Dan Wines is at Michigan State. And of course, Dan Aurell is down in Texas, like he said. So those are the yellow dots. You can see the red dots, they represent locations that we travel to. We mostly work with commercial beekeepers, and as you know, commercial beekeepers are most often migratory beekeepers. So we follow them around and do consultations and inspections for them wherever they are. So that's the red dots. And you can see there is one blue dot, and that is our lab. That's where we send all the samples, thousands of samples. We send a lot of samples over to the lab, and they'll process them for nosema, and sometimes they'll do a lab varroa count. Of course, there's virus samples we can send there. But that's basically the layout that we work in all these areas. A lot of travel, thousands of miles on the truck. But Dan can give you some more statistics. He's the numbers guy. So go ahead, Dan.
Perfect. So just like Matt was saying, we cover the country in our work checking on these migratory beekeeping operations. And among the 6 of us, we do consulting work for about 110 commercial operations. And this represents 500,000 managed colonies, when some of these operations are running more than 25,000 colonies. They're pretty amazing operations. And just doing some quick mental math, that means that our average client would be running about 5,000 colonies. And to get to all these locations, we're putting over 100,000 miles on our 5 field vehicles, our 4x4 trucks each year.
Yeah.
As well, a lot of these red dots are real beekeeping hubs, in the sense that of the 17 states that we do sampling in on a regular basis, every one of the top 10 honey producing states is on that list. And Matt can give you some more detail on the day-to-day work and the relationship of the consulting relationship that we have with our commercial beekeepers. But I also just want to say that this tech team program is I think, a pretty special aspect of the Be Informed partnership, and it is a bit different in that it caters specifically to the commercial beekeeping operations. You in the audience, some of you may be more familiar with the other programs from Be Informed, but I'll let Matt get into the details of what we do.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Dan. Yeah, I was just going to point out, like you said, right now they're all migrating. A lot of folks, my guys in California, they're all moving out, and a lot of them go to North Dakota or Montana, South Dakota, so that northern part of the U.S. and in the middle there, a lot of bees are being moved out there right now, or they're already there. Yeah, so field specialists, we are the boots on the ground. We're the guys in the field. We have a whole team of scientists and grant writers and everything, but the 6 of us, we're in the field. And so, of course, here's a picture of some boots, and you might recognize those flower petals. Yes, those are almond flower petals. So what do we do when we're in the field and our boots are on the ground? We do a lot. We mainly are doing colony inspections for commercial guys. We usually will try to do about 8 colonies per yard, and sometimes we'll pull up to a yard, it's 20 colonies, and sometimes it's 400 colonies if it's a holding yard. But we usually try to do at least 8 to get a good feel for that yard. We're looking at brood. We're doing mite washes in the field. If a beekeeper has some issues, we're going to help them troubleshoot those issues. We're going to do some diagnostics. We use test kits in the field. We're looking for brood diseases. We're monitoring those diseases over time. Like I said, we try to do about 8 colonies in a yard. We'll come back, usually 4 visits a year, plus or minus, and we're trying to follow those same colonies so that the beekeeper will get a sense of the trends. Are his varroa levels going up? Are his nosema levels getting under control? So we follow those same colonies to get a sense of the longitudinal sense of the data that we collect. We're collecting all kinds of data on all the colonies we inspect. Brood pattern, we note anything unusual. We're scoring how large is the colony. And so all these things are tracked and monitored over time. One of the cooler things we do, I have to admit, is the hygienic testing. We work with a lot of the queen breeders in California, and hygienic testing is one of my favorite things to do. As you can see there on the left is Rob Snyder. He's doing some hygienic testing. He's pouring liquid nitrogen into the cups that are on the brood to freeze the brood, which we later put in and see how much they remove. That's hygienic testing. It's always fun to play with liquid nitrogen too. We do research trials. We are currently in the middle of a queen study. That blue queen there in the top, we are doing a year-long research trial on some queens. Product testing. We just finished a trial on probiotics. So stay tuned for the results. I think Natalie is crunching the numbers now. So well, hopefully she's watching this webinar, but I think we'll see some results pretty soon from the probiotics trial that we just did. Is anything else, Dan, can you think of? All right, I think we're to our first poll question. Nat, do you do it or do I need to do it here? Let's see if I got it. Well, here we go. Poll 1. Can you guys see that?
Yeah, I just pulled it up, Matt. I'll do the polls to make sure that we have them in the recording here.
Sweet. It's working.
It looks like we're at 50%. Let's keep going. We'll give it another 15 seconds. Okay, we're going to stop it. We're at about 84% participating. Thank you. I'm going to end the poll and I'm going to share the results real quick. And for those of you who can't see this on your screen for whatever reason, it looks like 83% are backyard beekeepers in our audience, 9% sideline, 1% commercial, and 6% not currently beekeeping. I'm going to stop sharing and so they can move on.
Interesting. So it looks like we've got mostly backyard beekeepers and maybe 10% with 50 or more colonies, 51 plus colonies. Okay, let's keep going. Did you share the results, Ned, or can I close this?
You can close it. I don't know that you can see it because you're presenting, but that's why I say them out loud. So you're good to go.
Oh, okay, I see it. I'm gonna close this. All right, we're gonna keep going here. And yeah, Dan, you want to talk about this one?
Sure thing. So like we said, we've made some contrasts between commercial operations and who's in the audience. You know, us tech team members work mostly with commercial beekeepers, and here in the audience we're talking mostly to smaller scale beekeepers. But there's a few of you folks who are, again, keeping a fair number of colonies, and even 40 colonies can keep you pretty busy. But I do just want to talk a little bit about where we're drawing this list of 5 top practices and 5 worst practices. And of course, our experience is mainly, you know, our tech team experience is mainly with commercial beekeepers. But I do want to highlight that the commercial beekeepers consistently have lower losses and colonies in better condition than backyard beekeepers. So just as an example, here's a screenshot from our Data Explorer, which you can actually view online. You can look at loss by operation size and actually a bunch of other management characteristics or practices there on the left. So you can go explore this on your own afterwards. But this screenshot is meant to highlight that backyard beekeepers in that blue bar in a certain year in a certain region had higher losses than commercial beekeepers. So a wider bar, a longer bar is a bad thing in this graph. And this pattern shows up really consistently that commercial beekeepers have lower losses, and and that's even though they're putting their colonies through a lot of stresses. They're trucking their colonies across the country. They're managing them on a quick time frame. They often are keeping bigger yards. So there's a lot stacked up, factors stacked up against the commercial beekeepers. But even so, they do a lot of things right that help keep their colonies in good condition and reduce their losses. And even though the commercial beekeepers tend to perform quite well, of course, we see a range of colony conditions when we're looking at people's colonies. And so some of this talk is drawn from comparing the beekeepers on our lists who consistently perform well, what we see them doing, and the beekeepers who tend to have colonies in poor condition, and the pitfalls that we think they're walking into. So a lot of this is based on discussion among the tech team members, and as well, you'll see a smattering of references to data through this talk. So some of this is not just observational, but it's supported by the data.
Yeah. Yeah, I would just add that, yeah, this is, if you're a nerd like Dan and myself, this BIP website is pretty cool to play with, looking at the numbers and the data that BIP has collected over the last decade or so. Interesting stuff.
We'll try to make this, to make the recommendations applicable to everyone in the audience, even though you'll see some forklifts during the talk. And,
Right. Yeah, so we're gonna do a good cop, bad cop thing, and because I'm newer than Dan, I get to play the role of the bad cop, so I'm gonna put my bad cop hat on here. And Dan made this slide. He screenshotted me in a Zoom meeting, so he has a nice smiley picture, and there I am looking sad. I don't know what's going on with this shot of me, but yeah, Dan is smiling and looks good. All right, anything else there, Dan, or should we launch into it?
Let's start the countdown.
All right, so here it goes. We're going to start with the number 5 worst beekeeping practice. And the number 5 worst practice is poor equipment. Keeping your equipment, just equipment in bad shape. I'll give some examples here. And in fact, on the left there, you can see Dan. There he is, smiling again. Not sure. It's got a bad case of permagrin or something. He's smiling, but he's got a really horrible looking frame. You can see the wedge and the top bar looked like it came off, and I don't think there's even a bottom bar on there, or it might be missing a sidebar. These are the kind of frames that get gummed up and stuck in the colony, and not to mention, look how dark that wax is too. This is something you might want to rotate out. When it gets gummed up in there, it's going to take longer for you to inspect that hive. You're going to be smashing bees trying to get that out of there. So yeah, it's just one example. We also talk about bee-tight equipment and weather-tight equipment. And what I mean by that is not having a bunch of holes or gaps or spaces where for example, bee-tight, it means, you know, you don't want robber bees getting in, especially if you're feeding. Make sure around your feeders, there's no way for other bees to get in. I know commercial guys usually use cans or frame feeders. Frame feeders are really good. They're inside. Sometimes I've seen cans that aren't really on, and you get a bunch of robbing around there. For backyard guys, you know, top feeders, I've seen it where an inner cover with a slot was left on above the top feeder, and every colony in the neighborhood was going in and robbing, and there were a bunch of dead bees in the top. So that bee tight. Weather tight, you know, you don't want rain, basically rain getting in. You want to keep your colony dry. We'll have some more pictures of some nasty bottom boards where rain was getting in. Last thing I want to mention on this slide is use your downtime, you know, rainy days or over the winter to work on your equipment. Maintain and build your new equipment in the off season. There's, you know, a lot to be said about having equipment that stacks and stores nicely, keeps mice and moths out. So yeah, more about poor equipment. The rain. Here's an example of the rain had gotten in, and this is a bottom board, and it's just full of, it looks like chalk brood and some dead larvae. This is kind of a nasty bottom board. It just is a reservoir for disease. Let me talk a little about burr comb. Oh, let me just explain burr comb. Burr comb would be any wax that bees are drawing out that does not go where you want it to go on the frame. So on the right there, you can see all this burr comb, and not only that, it's full of honey. This is, you know, going to be horrible to inspect this colony. It's going to be a mess. Not only that, if you're applying treatments, where are you going to put that treatment? So keeping your hives in good shape and clean, get the burr comb out. Here's more examples. On the left, we've got some really nasty dark old comb. It looks like maybe there were some mediums in this deep box. Looks like there's a missing frame where there's a whole row of burr comb there. Broken frames, there's that same broken frame. Mold. Mold, I see a lot of mold. Sometimes you can't help it. But if you see it, get it out of there. It's no good. A lot of times you see it on the paper for pollen patties, protein patties, or just on the tops of your wooden frames. So here's an example. Here was a colony I saw. I took the boxes off. It was really crashing. It had maybe 1-2 frames of bees, and I think this video will play for you. Hopefully it's not too skippy. But you can see it was just taken over by hive beetle. And you can see down in here, you look at these hive beetles just partying away. There's larvae down there, hive beetle larvae, all the dead bees, the dead pupae pulled out. This is an extreme case of, you know, rain was getting in, weakened the bees, the hive beetle got in there. I think there was some patties in there. Patty just can be, you know, a hive beetle incubator. So poor equipment. Keep your equipment in good shape. It will go a long way towards being a better beekeeper. Let's see if I can get to the next slide. It keeps playing the video. Trying. We'll watch the video twice. How about that? It is kind of nasty. Look at those hive beetles. This did have a hive beetle trap in it too. Just wasn't enough.
Just while we're still on this video, I was going to mention that checking the bottom board can be one of the places where you can spot a problem like chalk brood in your colony, because you'll see those chalk brood mummies like Matt was showing. But also, being bad cop, you've showed some of the worst equipment we run into, but most of the hives we inspect have frames and wax that are a lot fresher than this.
Yeah, I'm the bad cop. All right, we're ready for poll number 2, everybody.
Okay, the next poll is up. We'll give you about 30 seconds. Matt and Dan, are you able to see the poll?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'll share the results in about 15 seconds.
I knew somebody would go for what's a split.
Okay, we have about 80% participating. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. Sharing the results. So in case you can't see it, we got 36% yes, 13% no, 49% maybe, and 2% what's a split?
Oh, wow. Interesting stuff. So it looks like mostly people will split if we divide the maybes in half. I like that. Yeah. Interesting. Well, I'll be darned. Look at that. Go ahead, Dan.
Sure thing. So counting down from the 5th top beekeeping practice now. So here's a picture of me in a nuke yard here down in Texas, and gosh, hundreds of singles set down on pallets. And I was checking on these colonies around the time of what you'd call check back, which is when if you've installed a queen cell when you made these splits, check back is the time when you return about 30 days later to check which ones have had that queen emerge, mate, and establish. So good splitting methods is number 5. So the most obvious reason to split your colonies would be swarm prevention in the spring. So of course, if your colony is outgrowing its space and the conditions are getting good in the spring, and the hive is getting more and more occupied with young bees, and there's less free space in the hive as the brood area expands and the stores are piling in. Bees are going to start thinking it might be time to be looking to swarm, and for that swarm to find a new place to live. So I would say that's the most obvious reason to consider splitting your colonies in the spring. But I'm going to go through a list of quite a few other reasons that splitting is really beneficial. And based on the survey data, but also just on our observation, commercial beekeepers split a lot more than backyard beekeepers tend to. And we think that's one of their keys to success. So just to go through these benefits, swarm prevention, of course. So this picture here on the right, this is just some of my bees earlier this spring. I was running them pretty strong, a little bit on the edge of the strength where I expected that some of them might want to swarm, even though I was giving them space and doing some equalizing. But yeah, so like I figured, one of them was starting to make swarm preparations. So I split it into 3 parts to just nip that in the bud. And so here you see that single with an excluder on it, and then 2 beige boxes on top, the queens there below, and I've sorted brood, open and sealed brood up to those beige boxes. And then the next morning I came and took those splits off and installed them in another location, and installed queens the day after that. And then super these colonies back up. So swarm prevention is one reason, as well, to make up for losses. Naturally, and just based on little mistakes you make or things that go wrong, you're going to have losses. Could you go back to slide, Matt?
Yeah, sorry.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So making splits to make up for those inevitable losses is a way to keep your numbers up. It's also an opportunity to requeen your colonies. When I took those 2 splits off and put fresh queens into them, all of a sudden those 2 splits have new 2020 queens, and they're going to be more productive, lay more eggs, and be less likely to swarm, whereas an older queen is going to be more likely to swarm. As well, varroa loads. Splitting is one part of a varroa management program. So if you've got a colony and you split it into 3, say you had 300 mites in that single colony, and if you'd let that run through the season, then those mites would build up from that starting level. But when you split it into 3, all of a sudden you've got 3 colonies with 100 mites each, and you've got 3 queens laying instead of just the single queen that you would have had. So during the spring season, those queens with their now tripled egg laying rate can help your bees' population growth outpace the varroa mites for a while until midsummer hits. And as well, in our survey data, which some of you may have responded to the survey that makes the basis for this data, splitting seems to be associated with lower losses. And some thoughts as to how to set your splits up for success. Because in my personal opinion, whenever a colony is below a certain level of strength, below about 5 frames of bees, then it's in sort of a precarious position. The going really has to be good for that colony to thrive. Whereas a colony that's sitting at a really full box of bees, that can weather some hiccups. It's robust enough to weather some hiccups. So when you're setting up splits, they're generally going to be on that smaller end. So you need to make sure that the timing of your splits is appropriate, that you're making your splits at a time when there's lots of availability of nectar and pollen from the field. And if there's any lack of those resources, you need to really baby them along by providing those resources. And just like I said, the splits need to be strong enough for the time in the season. It's a time when it's important to look for diseases when you're splitting, because if you make a split that has only 5 frames of bees in it, and they've got a big case of European foul brood in that brood that you've put into that split, that's really going to compromise their ability to build to a robust population level if they're having poor brood survival. And splitting also can present an opportunity for mite control. Besides the simple action of splitting, if you're splitting using a method that introduces a brood break, so either using cells or walk-away split, you're going to have a period where the queen isn't laying eggs. So you'll 12 days after that gap in egg laying, 9 or more days after that gap, after the old queen laid the last eggs, you're going to have a treatment window where you can have either minimal or no sealed brood. So even during the spring, where varroa treatments that mainly kill mites on the adult bees. They're generally not useful in the spring, but if you've introduced a brood break through one of these splitting methods, all of a sudden you can get much better efficacy in that short window of time. What do you think about that, Matt? Is there anything you want to add?
No, that was awesome. I really like the part where you can, you're saying split can be sort of a way to help control mites. It's almost a treatment in itself. But then if you combine that with a little brood break and an actual treatment, it's a really powerful way to control those mites. I like that, Dan. Good one. Good one, good cop. All right. Back to the bad cop. Here we go. Number 4, worst beekeeping practice is not to have a veterinarian. I think you can see on the left, you guessed it, that is European foul brood, EFB. And you do need antibiotics. If you've got EFB that looks like this, you definitely want to treat. In 2017, at the federal level, beekeepers were now required to get a veterinary feed directive, a VFD, and that's how we're able to acquire antibiotics. You can get a VFD from a vet and then order it online, or for me, actually, in my small hobby operation, I made contact with a vet and I actually bought the antibiotics right from him. It was very convenient. It was fast. In fact, I'll just tell the quick story on my experience. I was a little bit worried about getting a vet and getting antibiotics. I found EFB in March in some of my colonies, so I started making a few calls. I think I called 3 different vets and asked them what was required. It wasn't that hard. A couple of the vets said they wanted to come visit my yards and look at bees. And the last vet I called, he was a large animal vet, more used to dealing with big ag and stuff. And he said, well, I don't need to come to your yard, but if you bring me samples, that would establish our relationship. And what he was talking about was the VCPR, the veterinarian client-patient relationship, which is required to get the VFD, all these acronyms I know. So I talked to him. I dropped off a sample of dead bees and about a 2-inch square of sick brood. And he took those samples and ran tests on it and said, yes, I will give you a VFD. And by the way, you could just pick up the antibiotics from me. And so that's what I ended up doing. It was much faster than waiting for shipping. And I had antibiotics on my colonies in the next couple days. You may want to have all this established beforehand. If you've had EFB or AFB in the past, if you know it's in your operation, just anticipate it and be ready. So it wasn't that hard. I was, kind of dreading trying to get antibiotics and calling vets, and but it wasn't that hard. And it turns out the site visit was optional. Some will want to see your colonies, some won't. It worked out great for me. Oh, by the way, here's a picture of AFB on the left there, the ropiness, the classic ropiness. Just a little bit about the antibiotics you can get for foul brood. And here's a picture Rob took. Yeah, classic, nasty looking EFB. You can see the white trachea is there. It's, by the way, I think we're having I think we had a disease webinar. You can learn more about this stuff. I think if you go to our website, you see the recording of the disease webinar. I won't dwell on this stuff, but for EFB and sometimes for AFB, you want to use terramycin, also known as oxytetracycline. For AFB, the only one that really works is Tylen or Tylosin. And then just a note as well, for nosema, you can get fumagillin, but you are not required to have a VFD if you need to treat for nosema. So yeah, a couple more pictures, Dyscharria. Looks like AFB on the left there. You can see those caramely looking, the scales are starting to form. Those will dry out into a dark brown scale. On the right, that looks like EFB. And of course, you want to treat. This is kind of the way to treat. Most use a powder. You mix in your antibiotics with some powdered sugar. You put a couple tablespoons on it. follow the directions. You can get different concentrations of the antibiotic, so just follow the directions. Whatever your vet or the instructions on the label say is what you should do. Just a couple more resources for you around the whole VFD and getting a vet and what you might want to do if you've got foul brood. There's a disease manual that BIP has. It's got awesome pictures. It'll show you AFB, EFB, really good to help diagnose the issues with your colony. Of course, we plug our own BIP webinars here. These are a great resource. Test kits. In the field, a lot of the field specialists, we carry a bunch of these diagnostic kits in the field, and it's great. Within a few minutes, you can confirm, yes, this is EFB, or no, it's not EFB. Maybe this is just chalk brood or something else, and I don't need to treat. The reports, we generate reports for all of our BIP member beekeepers, and they can be used to give to your vet. And we will document for you that you have EFB and say it's been tested. Online resources, that's how I started. I looked for a vet, just Google, vets beekeeping in my state. And there are several websites that will help you, give you a clue or a way to find vets, and they list them with their phone numbers. It was easy. Make a few calls. And yeah, I actually had a good experience with my vet. I don't know why I was worried, but it turned out great. And I treated per the label, and my bees are doing really good now. Anything else there, Dan? I think I covered it on the worst practice number 4, no vet.
Sure. Right. No, I absolutely agree with you that first picture you showed of really severe European foul brood needed treatment with terramycin, also known as oxytetracycline. I also just want to mention that yes, if you see an active case of American foul brood, we recommend burning that symptomatic colony. But terramycin or Thailand can be used in the rest of that yard as long as they're not showing, once you've made sure they're not showing symptoms, but to prevent American foul brood from establishing an infection in those colonies. So for control of American foul brood rather than treatment.
Yeah.
And that Honeybee Veterinary Consortium seems like a good resource.
Yeah.
Okay, so on to the 4th best beekeeping practice. Rotate your treatments. And I'm thinking specifically about Varroa treatments in this case, given that we see Varroa as the primary pest, of the pests and pathogens. That's the primary one that you need to control for successful, consistently successful beekeeping. And there are quite a number of different control options. So just in this diagram here, I've got oxalic acid there on the top left. I've got Apivar on the top right, for which the active ingredient is amitraz. And down in the bottom, we've got a bucket of Apigard, which is one of the treatments that has thiamol as the active ingredient. So when I'm talking about rotating treatments, I'm specifically talking about rotating your active ingredients through the year and not relying on a single active ingredient. And just to take a step back, Varroa treatment on its own is really important. So of course it's important to rotate treatments, but just on a more basic level, we think it's really important to use Varroa treatments. Non-chemical interventions can get you some of the way, but generally they're not effective enough to prevent high colony losses, especially if you're relying on non-chemical interventions for a few years in a row. So we really recommend that you use some chemical control as well. And chemical control, this of course includes those chemicals such as formic acid, oxalic acid, Hoepfinger, which has a hop extract. So these are not all what you would think of as something made in a lab and something you might be reluctant to use. But some of the benefits of rotating different active ingredients through the year, one of them would be to spread your risk. So if, because of the weather conditions, your main treatment in the fall didn't perform as well as you expected, then if you've got a oxalic dribble planned as a follow-up, then you're already planning proactively to address a treatment failure or just a treatment that didn't perform quite as well as you wanted to. So you're hedging your bets and not relying on a single time that you're putting the treatment in to do the mite control you need. As well, since the different options, there are different times of year when they're most effective, or they have different temperature ranges. So, for example, you can use thiamol-based products at temperatures that are a little bit higher than when you can use formic acid-based products. So, for example, you could put into action a thiamol-based treatment earlier, closer to midsummer than you could a formic treatment. So by putting a thiamol treatment on in like potentially late summer, if your temperatures allow, then that would be an earlier chance to put a treatment on than if you had to wait till early fall for your formic-based treatment. And as well, especially when we're talking about the synthetic miticides, the ones with really high efficacy, relying on several products should help slow down the development of resistance, of resistance in the mites. And even though there are some early signs of amitraz resistance, amitraz is still clearly the most effective miticide. These early signs of resistance are nowhere near the level of resistance that were reached with coumaphos and fluvalinate. And just to take some cues from the commercial operations, when you look at these migratory large-scale operations and the most common treatments and treatment combinations that they're using, if someone's using thiamol or amitraz as their major mite treatment, their loss levels tend to be about average. However, the beekeepers who report using combinations of treatments, so for example, amitraz at one time in the year and oxalic acid at another, or amitraz and formic acid in rotation, they tend to have lower winter losses. And this is from a study done by Ariella Haber and colleagues at University of Maryland. And again, it's based on the BIP Loss and Management Survey. And backyard beekeepers tend to choose different treatments than the commercial group does. But even so, there's still quite a bit of reliance on a single product, which, like I said, doesn't give you those options to hedge your bets, to use more different treatment windows, or delay resistance. So here, just as an example, the northern small-scale beekeepers who were surveyed, even though the most common treatment regimens were single chemicals on their own, the beekeepers who used formic acid and oxalic acid and rotated those into their treatment schedule had lower losses during the winter. Did I miss anything, Matt?
Oh, no, that was good. I like you're the numbers guy. You got all the graphs and the data. I just show a bunch of pictures. So I like that. Backing up what you're saying with data. I mean, BIP is about data. And okay, so we're up to the third poll and people are clicking away. Interesting.
Numbers are flying in. We'll give it another 15 seconds. To our presenters, just watch time because we want to make sure there are so many questions coming in on the chat. We want to make sure we have time for some of those. So we'll give this another 10 seconds here. We're about 73% participants. All right, I'm going to close the poll. I'm going to share the results. It looks like we've got about 13% at once per month. 73, the majority percent, is at 2 or 3 times per month. 14% at 4 or more times a month, and no one answered that they only look at the traffic at the entrance.
Wow, that's good. Yeah. So yeah, as you can guess, the third for worst beekeeping practice is missing visits in the spring. That was why we asked that poll question. It is one of the busiest times for beekeepers in the spring. And I know for commercial guys, it's the almonds, right? Spring starts in the almonds. For hobbyists, spring starts in the spring, wherever you are. You know, all beekeeping is local. You should know your seasons. Missing visits in the spring is the third worst beekeeping practice. So I was glad to see people are doing 2, 3, or even 4 visits in the spring. There's a picture of some almond blooms there for you. Here's a commercial guy. He's putting in his colonies in the almonds. Notice it's right before the bloom. They're not yet blooming, but commercial guys, they tend to, I mean, it's chaos trying to get all your bees across the country and then get them into the almonds. A lot of times they'll think, I got them in, now I can just take a break. But we do not recommend that. We recommend, you know, this is the time to be active. All kinds of things are happening here. You just need to do your basic animal husbandry. And what do I mean by that for honeybees? Well, it's inspections. Are they queen right? Do they have enough food stores? Are they going to starve? Do I need to feed them? You know, which is, it's a common thing late in spring before some flow is happening. I've seen a lot of starvation, even up until May, where I am. So yeah, are they plugged out? Does the queen have enough room to lay eggs, or are they gonna swarm? Do you see, you know, some cells, some queen cells in there? And of course, always check for diseases. Diseases, a lot of times in the spring, that's when EFB will show up. A lot of these brood diseases, chalk brood, they tend to show up in the spring more. Nosema, another one, kind of over winter and early spring. And for commercial guys too, you need to figure out who's doing what with your broker. Less for hobbyists, you know, you're doing all the work, but for commercial guys, you know, is your broker going to feed, or am I feeding? Who's doing the work? So have all that stuff planned out and ready. Another important thing in the spring is the placement of your colony. And this is a little bit ridiculous here, but these colonies placed up, you know, 15 feet. It's not for bears. It's to keep them dry. I'm not sure if it really floods that much. Rob took this picture, so we should ask him more. But full sun is always good, especially in the spring. Your bees will be flying sooner, as opposed to if you put them in the shade in a cold, wet area. We often see problems in the almonds where if it's a rainy, cold season, the bees can really be struggling and they need some help. We also just recommend, even if it's a good year, to throw a protein patty in the spring. Even if you're not a commercial guy, if you're next to ag or anywhere, there's, you know, chemicals in our environment that are being sprayed, and if your bees are bringing back something that, and you don't know, a pollen patty in there, even though they're bringing in a ton of pollen, if they're bringing in some chemical with that, well, a protein patty will dilute that. We think that will help, because we usually do. Every year we see, you know, some damaged brood coming out of almonds, and it's usually about a month later, 2 to 4 weeks later, where you see this dead and dying emerging bees, and it was maybe something they brought some chemicals in. another basic animal husbandry is preventing swarms. All right, you don't want to lose bees. There's that same swarm that Dan had on one of his slides. It looks like it's still swarming. Maybe someone should go out and catch that real quick. Yeah, so swarming is a big one. Requeening, splits, all these kind of things that are kind of overlapping what we're talking about now. Let's see, what else do we have here about swarming? Now, basic health checks. I mean, you could just look outside here. This, I think, was in the almonds, some of these pictures. Are there dead bees out front? If so, why? It could be a number of things. Of course, everyone thinks it's, a spray kill or my bees brought chemicals back, but it could be a number of things. It might not be spray. It could be poisonous plants. I know in California, we have a California buckeye, which the beekeepers talk a lot about, and the nectar or pollen or both have chemicals in it that damage bees, and if it's bad enough, it'll kill adults, and it looks just like a spray kill. We've seen dead bees out front because the weather was iffy. On a cold, wet year, your bees, your foragers go out and they get caught in the rain or a cold front. They get a little wet, they can't make it back, or in this case, I think the picture on the right there, you can see some of the bees even have pollen on them, and it's as if they went out, foraged, got their pollen back, and they almost made it to the entrance, missed and landed on the ground, got too cold and died. So it could be a lot of things. I've seen this situation where a treatment is too hot, a mite treatment, maybe formic, and it got above 85 degrees. You'll see dead bees. You'll also see a lot of dead larvae and pupae being pulled out as well. So basic health checks. Anything else there, Dan, that you want to add, or keep going?
That sounds good, Matt. Thanks for covering that.
Okay, take it away, good cop.
So I'm going to go through this one a bit quicker. Pull honey and treat early. This is what we see as the third top beekeeping practice. So here you've got some of my colleagues at one point who were pulling honey and blowing the bees out of the supers with with a bee blower. But regardless of the way that you approach this, that's a lot of supers to take off, and you've got to account for that. And some of the reasons to get this done early is there's a lot of work that needs to be done to get the bees into good condition several months from now. So beekeeping is always about not what's going on right now, but how can we get the bees into good condition once they're in their next phase of the colony cycle. So right now, even though the sun's still shining, that honey needs to be taken off. The colonies probably will need to be fed lots of syrup to get up to wintering weight. You want to get a timely mite treatment on those, and like we were saying earlier, some of the mite treatments have restrictions on when you can use them, so a lot of them shouldn't and are not allowed to be used during the time when supers are on. And to raise healthy winter bees, you need good nutrition during the time those bees are going through their larval and pupal development. And as well, you need the varroa levels to be brought down to a low level, certainly below 3%, for those, certainly the last round of brood rearing, but ideally, if a round of brood rearing takes 3 weeks, then certainly the last 3 weeks of full-scale brood rearing, but even better would be to have your mite levels down to a low level for the last 6 weeks of brood rearing. And you want all this to happen before your colonies look like this. You want the honey in the barrel, and you want your healthy winter bees already raised, and your colonies in good wintering condition. And especially with honey prices being as low as they are these days on the in the bulk honey prices, that trade-off becomes a bit tilted in that the extra few pounds of honey you might make by delaying pulling your last boxes of honey are really outweighed by focusing on your bee health going into winter. What do you think about that, Matt?
Yeah, sounds good. I like that last picture you had, Dan. All right, here we go. Number 2 worst beekeeping practice. It's poor feeding. All right, feeding is important. Basic animal husbandry again. On the left here, you can see a picture where there's a treatment and it's overlap touching the pollen patty, the protein patty that's in there. That's not so good. You don't want your bees eating that treatment. This is probably a contact treatment. Yeah, you want to keep your treatments and your food apart. Here's some more examples. On the left there, you can see it looks like robbing is happening. On the right there as well, there's a bucket. It looks like there might be a leaky bucket, and the robbers are just glomming on there to that top right there. So too much and too little. You know, I see it sometimes. A beekeeper gives a dink, you know, 2 patties, or you know, a really strong colony, you know, just a little bit of syrup. A lot of times, you know, you need to look at each hive differently, and it's hard for commercial guys. Hobbyists, you should be able to really customize your feeding for each colony. Also be careful if it's too cold. You don't want to apply syrup if it's not getting, it needs to be at least in the 50s or higher. Look at your low temperatures too. They can't eat that syrup if it's too cold. Also, your can, or if you're using those, that might, you know, compress in the cold and expand in the warm, and just leak all into your hive. Spills and leaks, bad. It leads to robbing. Sporadic feeding, we know it's been studied that EFB can come out when there's a sporadic nectar flow. Well, it's the same with feeding. If you're feeding, you know, if you start feeding, continue feeding until, you know, there's a good flow. Supplements. I just wanted to mention about supplements. A lot of people put essential oils into their syrup, which is good. It's a feeding stimulant. It's not a treatment or anything. It's a supplement. But be careful, especially in the fall or anytime there's a dearth. If you're putting in those essential oils, they really attract the robbers. So I skip it completely, especially in the fall when there's a dearth. Here's an open feeder, a barrel feeder, and you can see all the dead bees on the bottom. And also notice around the opening, those are not bees. Those are wasps, probably yellow jackets. So there's no bees getting fed here. They're just dying. And yeah, it looks a couple packages worth on the bottom there. Here's another shot. This is looking down into a barrel, an open feeder. There's a couple packages worth of dead bees there. The open feeding, it's probably great if you've got 10,000 mating nukes, as opposed to going and feeding each one of those. Put an open feeder, and if you're a commercial person, you can afford to lose a couple packages worth of bees. But for hobbyists, you should be looking at, you know, each colony individual and doing what's appropriate. This is, yeah, an open barrel where there's significant drowning in there. Yeah, anything else you'd like to mention, Dan? I think that's it for poor feeding practices.
Yeah, just the scenario I've seen a few times, which doesn't really relate to someone who's keeping their bees stationary, but it can really be a mess when if guys are feeding their colonies a bit too late in hive feeders and right before a move, so the temperatures are so cold that the bees are not effectively taking up the syrup and storing it. Then having syrup sloshing around in those feeders when the hives are on the truck in transit, that can be really bad.
Yeah, that would be bad.
But that would be the same thing, like feeding too late, even if your hives are stationary, then all of a sudden you've got syrup sitting there as a moisture source in the in-hive feeder.
Good point. Feeding too late would be a worst practice.
That's right.
Yeah. Good.
So from there, I'll take number 2, which number 2 on the good list, which would be good treatment practices. And this encompasses a lot of different details on the individual treatments. And just here on the left, I've got a pyramid of IPM tactics from Penn State, just as a diagram showing that Just like we were talking about before, you know, splitting is a cultural practice that does help with mite control. But as well, there are other practices like removing some drone brood, removing capped drone brood, drone trapping. But then these higher levels of the pyramid, like chemical treatment, you know, they really have a place in proactive honeybee management as well. So we'll just go. I'll keep this discussion a little bit high level, but besides, so of course, what we want to do is we want to maximize effectiveness, and it goes without saying that you don't want to contaminate your honey or use treatment practices that are illegal. So now that that's out of the way, the label's the law. You want to maximize the effectiveness. So, for example, here on the left, this is a picture one of my colleagues, Dan Lyons, sent of him doing an oxalic acid dribble. So that's oxalic acid and sugar syrup that he's dribbling between the frames and onto the seams of bees. And you can see that these bees are nicely clustered up, forming a pretty tight cluster. And I think I might see a little bit of snow on the ground. So Dan would know better, but it looks, just from looking at this picture, like this, like he picked his opportunity for the oxalic dribble really well, in that this is very likely a broodless period. So you're getting maximum efficacy, effectiveness from the treatment that only works on the mites on the adult bees. And just similarly, contact type treatments, if you go back one slide. Mm-hmm. Contact type treatments like Apivar should be placed in adjacent to brood frames, like in between two brood frames within the cluster, because they're not a fumigant treatment. They rely on the traffic of the bees on the strips and to bring those to the mites. And where are the mites? Which bees are going to be carrying the most mites? It's going to be nurse bees. So you need those strips near the brood where the nurse bees are active. Mm-hmm. And bee axis, burr comb, like Matt was saying, it's a good idea to just regularly clean off your top bars as the bees build burr comb. But one of the reasons for that is that if you're putting say a thymol treatment on top of a bunch of burr comb and squishing it down with some more burr comb from the second box, that's really going to limit the bee access to that treatment. Mm-hmm. And like I mentioned before, timing in the colony cycle, oxalic acid, like on the left, works really well when you've got a brood break. And on the flip side, you want to minimize the damage to your colonies. So this colony on the left, I can hardly see any bees in that hive unless I zoomed into the picture. But when I looked at this colony, there might have been a frame or two of bees, you know, just scattered in among that, a couple frames in the bottom box. This colony, you would not be able to treat with a lot of your treatment options. Regardless of the temperature, formic acid is a formic acid based product or a thymol based product is just going to nuke this, really set this colony back and kill it outright. So really assessing whether your colony is strong enough to handle some of those treatments is important. I'd be comfortable putting an Apivar strip into this colony, but few other options would be appropriate here. As well, the environmental conditions are important to consider. So just as an example, on the Formic Pro label, they say that it shouldn't be applied at temperatures above 92 degrees Fahrenheit, or 33 C for Canadians. And toxicity. There are downsides to some treatments, fluvalinate and coumaphos, when they build up in the comb and the bees are exposed to them long term, they do have detrimental effects. And Amitraz does build up in comb to some extent, and thymol builds up at pretty high levels as well. So that's just something to keep in mind, that there's no real treatment that only has upsides.
Good. Yeah, I like that. Similar to feeding and your treatments for hobbyists, really look at each individual hive and address them on the individual level. Whereas commercial guys, they do it at a yard level a lot, but they could still train their crews. Just, oh, we've got a dink here. I don't want to kill it by putting Formic on. So yeah, that's good advice, Dan. All right, here we go. Here coming up. Are we ready? Number 1 worst beekeeping practice. Relying on unproven methods. Okay, we see a lot of this. I don't know if it's beekeepers or just humans, but they hear something and they want to try it. We're all familiar with snake oil, right? If it's, claims to do everything, it probably does nothing. I like this picture. It's talking about, it's the strongest, best snake oil for lameness. That sounds pretty good. I could use some, could help my lameness out. But let's look at some examples. Yeah, if it's advertised as a cure-all, and we see sometimes these strange things in colonies where, it kills mites and it feeds the bees and it boosts, it works on EFB. And well, really, that's interesting. Have you tested it? Oh no, but I had the best year last year and I used that product, so it must work, right? Well, no, basic, science says you need to have a control and a test group. I'll talk a little bit more about that. So yeah, you can see down low, it turns out microwave popcorn is a cure-all for it kills mites and it boosts your bees. In the middle here, we see some white powder and it looks like a loaf of bread. I think that's probably some homemade patty going in there. On the right, we've got some kind of trendy Varroa product. It looks like a bunch of towels. It might be the oxalic glycerin thing, which can work great. I've seen it work great, but I've also seen it fail miserably. So what I want to talk about is if you want to try something new, that's great. That's fine. We need to progress and we need, resistance is real. We need to find new things to use. Do your own trial. For commercial guys, this might mean split a yard in half and put the old method on half and the new method on the other half. So you have a control group and a test group. It's not that hard. You have BIP come out, do inspections, and we'll give you a report and it'll divide the two halves and you'll be able to compare them. It's really nice. If you're a hobbyist, you can still do this. You've got a couple hives, you want to try something new? Well, we'll do what you did last year on this hive, and then maybe this new product you want to try, do it on the other half of your hives. Even if it's just 2, you can do your own trials. Don't just simply apply something to your whole operation because you heard from somebody who heard from somebody else. That's the best thing ever. So on-farm trials is what we would like to do. And BIP, when I joined BIP, I thought I was going to be doing a lot of this, and I'm doing more of it lately. Beekeepers, they want to test things out. So, okay, up for our I think this poll number 4. All right, this is probably going to give you a hint about what the number 1 best beekeeping practice is, but let's go ahead and take this poll. Thank you, Net. Oh, this looks like it's a bunch of them. Okay, it's 2 polls in 1. Excellent.
Yeah, if you guys can't see the entire poll, you may need to stretch your dialog box. There are 2 questions in this poll, or you should have a scroll bar. We'll give it another 10 seconds here.
I like what I'm seeing.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. We're at about 3/4 of our participants putting in an answer. Here are the results. All right. I think everyone is probably pleased to see this. We've got 94% are going to plan to monitor for Varroa. The 2% probably, 3% probably not, and 1% no. And if you plan to monitor, which monitoring method? 6% sticky board, 25% powdered sugar roll, 65% alcohol wash, 4% visual ID of mites on bottom board in adult bees.
I like those results.
Wow, yeah, like Matt and Net said, I'm pretty impressed with the responses there.
Yeah.
So you're already putting into practice some of the things we'll talk about here in a minute.
Right. So who's doing the drum roll? All right, I'll skip the drum roll. Are we ready? Here we go, Dan.
So the top successful beekeeping practice is to know your mite levels. And I heard some people, I saw some people in the chat saying, this is the most important tool. So you definitely, you were definitely right on. You agree with the tech teams.
Yeah.
So knowing your mite levels, here's a picture of an alcohol wash test with quite a number of mites in the fine screen. It looks like 15 mites or more in the 300 bee sample. So that would be, if that's 15 mites, then that's a 5% mite level. So which I would consider quite high.
Yeah.
The first thing, just to get this out of the way, is to not rely on visual observation. So that lower left picture where there's a varroa mite riding on top of the thorax of that worker, that's not a very sensitive method of looking for varroa, and it's certainly not even a sampling method. And part of the reason for this, I don't remember the exact numbers, but Samuel Ramsey from the University of Maryland Bee Lab did some research quantifying where on the bees the mites prefer to ride when they're in the so-called phoretic but also feeding phase, and it was somewhere above 90%, I believe, of the mites were on the underside of the abdomen. So if it was 95% that were under the abdomen, then if you see a single mite on top of a thorax, that means there are 19 others in your field of view that are just not visible to you because they're underneath the bees' abdomens. As well, especially in the spring when you have where you'll often have massive brood areas, but still a pretty modest bee population. This second picture here is of a mite family reproducing in a brood cell. During spring, if you've got a huge brood area, certainly more than half and perhaps 2/3 of your mite population may actually be hidden under those brood cappings. So not visible to your eyes or even to your alcohol wash test. Sampling at well-chosen times. So I want to highlight sampling before and after treatment. So if you're coming up towards a treatment window where you would be able to put a treatment on, and to sample then to make sure you need to, but especially if your mite levels are way higher than you expect, to not only put that planned treatment on, but immediately plan a follow-up treatment or to somehow intensify your treatment. And then after the treatment to make sure that it worked as you hoped or as you expected. Use a reliable method of mite detection. So the method we recommend is the alcohol wash method. There are several variations on that, but the way we do it in the field, the same day that we were sampling colonies, is to use mason jars, 35% alcohol, a lot of agitation, and a couple of different sized screens to catch mites. And we're running, I believe, a 92% recovery average using that method the last time we checked. By contrast, when we ran the numbers on a powdered sugar shake, which we did a smallish test of that method to compare it with the alcohol wash method that we rely on. The tech teams were getting only about 62% mite recovery in the sugar shake. So if you're using the sugar shake method, then you want to be a bit more conservative, respond at slightly lower mite levels. I would highly recommend keeping records, even if it's just in a little spiral bound notebook that you keep in the truck or reserve for your visits to your bee yards, so that a year from now you can look back and say, well, as I was pulling honey last year, where were my mite levels at, and compare your current mite levels. So if your mite levels are, we're peaking at about 3% as you're pulling honey and about to put an effective treatment on, you know, that, yeah, I wouldn't be too concerned about that, because you want to, at least the way we see it, is to minimize the time that your colonies are above roughly 3% mite load. And by keeping records of past years, you can start to pick up trends if your mite levels are ratcheting up slightly from 2017 to 2018 to 2019 at the same time in the colony cycle. Then you might realize that, well, my treatment regimen is sort of working, but just not quite bringing me back to the starting point of mite level each year. So it would be a concern if your mite levels are ratcheting up each year. And if you do a mite wash and you get a certain mite level in that 300B test, how scary is that mite level? How concerned should you be? Yeah, we can't tell you that, you know, based on, we can't say, you know, we can't necessarily say anything above 3% is really of concern. You really should consider a treatment immediately, because it absolutely depends on a bunch of other factors. So what's the health of your hives? Are they in good nutrition? Then they might be able to handle a little bit more of a mite load. Are you seeing signs of overt deformed wing virus? So these crumpled wings and often shortened abdomens, like in this picture from Rob. If you're seeing these signs of viral damage, even at a moderate mite level, then that might indicate to me that even though your mite levels are at a moderate level, your viral levels are getting out of control. So that could be a holdover from a few months ago when your mite levels were out of control. But that would make me more concerned going forward, because even if your mite levels only are kept moderate, there might be a lot more viral transmission within your colonies than if you were starting the season with a low viral level. But especially I would consider it in terms of time in the season. And this is going to be very local. So just as an example, say you're bringing colonies up to the northern tier states, where you've got a really good honey flow during the summer, but fall comes pretty fast. But the honey supers might be on your colonies for 2.5, 3 months. So going into that honey production period, like in late May, 3% is not a safe level at all, because if you're starting your period of time when the colonies are supered up for 2-3 months at 3%, you're going to be in a world of trouble come August, September. So for those northern tier states, we consider a threshold. If your average mite level is at 1% or above, that would be pretty concerning in late May, early June. As well, there's so much brood at that time of year that the alcohol wash or powdered sugar shake there in the early spring is going to underrepresent the actual mite population in your hives. And yeah, so this is sort of a glib simplification of how people talk about it in crop protection, but there's an injury level and an action threshold. So the injury level, we think at about 3% mite level, colonies tend to start taking damage from varroa mites. But the action threshold would be earlier on in the season. You want to respond earlier in the season to avoid your colonies being at 3% for too long. And that's going to depend on your honey flows, the times your colonies are supered up, etc. And so we can't give you a prescription for how to assemble a successful mite treatment regimen for your area or the way you run your colonies. But I would definitely recommend the Honeybee Health Coalition's guide, which is called The Tools for Varroa Control, I believe, and that's available online. And it has a fantastic breakdown of all the information that you need to consider when you're looking at these different both manipulations or cultural interventions like splitting, like drone brood removal, but also gives you a lot of information, like in this table, about the individual the treatments when you're allowed and able to use them, the temperature restrictions, dosage, how to work them into your treatment regimen for the best effect. And as well, I'm going to plug a future one of our webinars. Again, I'm not going to dive into the weeds on how to set up a mite treatment program, but we'll cover some more of those aspects of mite control in future talks. And yeah, what do you think about that, Matt?
That was really good. I think I learned something too. I would maybe just add that, yeah, monitoring your mite levels. You know you're going to treat. So what we do is, it's all about mites, right? So we come in and we get mite levels for a yard or an operation, and the beekeepers will use that. They know they're going to treat, but they use the information about their mite loads as more of a, when am I going to treat? If they're at less than 1%, well, that's not critical that I treat right away. If they're any hive in the yard is 3% or more, you need to treat right away. So it's more of a timing thing. We all know we're going to treat. It's just about when is the best time to treat. But maybe you covered that too, Dan. I'm thinking you did. You covered a lot there. So let's look at the summary here. We've made it through the top 5 and worst 5. So everyone take a picture. There's the top 5, worst 5. I think we've got another poll coming up. So let's do the poll. I think it's going to be a multi-question one. So you might have to scroll.
And you'll notice that some of these, or that all of these questions are a reiteration of the polls we ran earlier. So curious what you think now.
We'll give it another 10 seconds. I'll get it up to 75% participation here. Okay, so I'm going to end the poll and share the results. It looks like that you've taught our audience what a split is. It looks like there's no one in that category under that one. Hopefully you can see the results. I won't go through them all here, but we do have some changes in each of these questions. If you scroll down, you should be able to see for yourselves that our numbers have changed a little bit. And especially look at these mite questions. Those have changed. So, and we can share these changes after the webinar. So I don't know that they have any more slides. If you'll advance, we'll see.
Sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is just where we thank our sponsors. We all work out of a universities on the right, and on the left, all the companies and orgs that have supported us. And of course, a huge thanks to the BIP member beekeepers. I don't know if we have any on today, but yeah, so thank you everyone. And
yeah, so I want to step on. We looks like we ran out of time for questions, which is unfortunate. If some of you want to stay on, we can try to stay on for a little longer to address some of them. But I want to give a big thank you to our presenters. They can't hear applause except for mine here, but I know that there are some of you out there giving them a big round of applause. Also want to thank our audience for joining us. Really appreciate you sticking around for the whole thing. We didn't intend for it to go over, but lots of good information, so it did take longer than expected. I will just put a plug in for our webinars coming up. We're going to be tackling adult bee disease and also varroa. And so look for those. You'll get an email from us about those. At this time, I would just ask if you want to support us. We are a nonprofit. There's a link here for you. And I'm going to turn it over to Eric. Unfortunately, I can see the participant list dropping really quickly here, so you may not be sticking around to hear your particular question, but we'll stay on for a few more minutes to see if we can get some of these questions answered. Eric, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, hello. All right, so we have a bunch of good.
I don't hear you, Eric, if you're.
How about now? Do you hear me now?
Yes.
yeah.
All right, cool. Sorry, guys. There we are. Okay, so let me get this opened up here. Okay, so we've got a number of good questions. Unfortunately, I actually have a training I've got to get into after this, so I have to go quick as well. But equipment related questions, we've got some from David Hicks, Geraldine Osmer, and Jeff Esposito, and Joe Hahn. So if you guys can, maybe we can just answer these as thoroughly but quickly as possible. So from David Hicks, he was asking if there's any suggestion on how to convert if you happen to get a medium frame in a deep box.
Oh,
that would be an equipment related question.
How to convert? Well, yeah, it's an interesting question. Yeah, a lot of guys actually use medium frames in deep boxes on purpose. And the bees will build comb below it, and usually it's drone comb. And then they'll come back and they'll scrape off the entire bottom. You do have to be really proactive and get in there and scrape it off before it starts going crazy. You have to make sure frames are nice and lined up. I personally don't use that method, but yeah, I just carry a bunch of frames with you, and when you notice it, swap them out. If you've got brood in there, move it to the edge so that you can swap it out next visit. I don't know, Dan, do you have anything to add to that?
That sounds like a perfect way to get that medium frame to work that out of your box, especially by putting in the bottom box edge frame. That's the best place to encourage the bees to empty it of brood to hatch out and not fill it with brood again.
Very cool. Thanks, guys. So next question, actually the following two also equipment related questions, they tie into the same thing. Geraldine Osmar and Jeff Esposito questions are, what do you do when the comb is old and black? And of course, Jeff's question is, new beekeeper here, how do I go about rotating older frames out?
Yeah, so it depends on a bit on like what kind of equipment you're using. Do you have a plasticell foundation in that wooden frame? Is it wax or wired wax foundation? I mean, the simplest method is to discard the whole frame and then put new foundation into your boxes. But if you want to be more environmentally friendly, reusing equipment, you can definitely, if it's wired foundation, you can punch or cut that old comb out and rewire some foundation into the wooden frame. Even if it's a wooden frame with plasticell and plasticell foundation. I've done this on bee farms where it's labor intensive, but you can scrape all the wax off, all the dark wax, pressure wash the plasticell there in the frame, and then re-wax it with some melted wax on a sponge, and then put it back in just as you would fresh foundation.
Very cool. Thank you so much. We had a question from Joe Hahn, if there's any recommendation for, he said recipe, but anything particular, or recipe for hive beetle traps, or just different methods of catching and eliminating.
It's a good one. Yeah, for hive beetles, you know, I don't see a ton of it. Maybe in the South, Dan sees more. But I do see various forms of traps, you know, with the ones with the little holes, and you put some kind of oil in there. There's also the Swiffer pads that you can buy, that where the hive beetles get stuck in that, whereas the bees don't. I think maybe more importantly is just to have a strong colony and a size appropriate hive. It seems that if the bees can defend their home, they will, and small hive beetle won't be a problem. If they're healthy, they can usually take care of it. But when you're putting on supers and adding space, they have a hard time defending the extra space. So try not to give them too much space. I know it's tough, especially in the spring. You don't want them to swarm, so you give them space. Maybe Dan has something to add as far as traps or recommendations.
I was going to highlight the same things you mentioned, keeping strong colonies. As your colonies are, if your colonies are starting out small as a split, really baby them along to make sure that they get out of that vulnerable phase as quickly as possible, and keeping the appropriate amount of space. And yeah, either Swiffer type pads or other microfiber pads can be a really nice mechanical trap that just gives a slow attrition with beetles.
All right, thank you so much. I think we're going to have to end it there. I'm afraid Zoom is going to cut us off. We do have some of these questions likely in our blog already answered, and then ones that we don't have and we're also interested in, we may turn into a blog. So while your question might not have been answered in the Q&A, we may have it for you either in a current or a future blog. So please take a look at our blogs at our website, beinformed.org. Sign up. That also gets you on the list for future blogs and future webinars. Again, thank you for joining us. Appreciate you taking the time. And we look forward to seeing you again in a couple weeks for our next webinar. Stay healthy, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.